Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The sound of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the hall, sealing the fate of the property at 472 Maple Grove. Andrew Wilson, a 34-year-old software developer, smiled with satisfaction as he signed the documents, making official the purchase of his first home in Fairview Heights, Illinois. The two-story residence, with a stunning swimming pool, had been an exceptional find, especially considering the well-below-market price. "Congratulations, Mr. Wilson," said Rachel Martinez, his realtor, handing him the keys. "I should mention that this property has an interesting history with the local HOA. The previous owner, Mr. Richardson, officially canceled his membership 6 months ago." Andrew arched an eyebrow. "Is that possible?" "Yes, as long as the property wasn't originally attached to the HOA when it was built," Rachel explained. "Mr. Richardson discovered the original documents proving that the house predates the formation of the association. He was able to get it delisted through legal means." That information seemed like an added bonus for Andrew, who had always heard horror stories about controlling HOAs. Over the next few days, he settled into his new home, setting up his home office, overlooking the backyard, where the turquoise pool sparkled in the early summer sun. On the morning of the fourth day, while working on a new software project, Andrew heard insistent knocks on his door. When he opened it, he was met by a middle-aged woman with perfectly groomed blonde hair and a stern expression, accompanied by a younger man holding a clipboard. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Catherine Brooks, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association, and this is Paul Davis, our administrator," she said with an artificial smile. "We noticed that your pool is missing its HOA regulations safety cover." Andrew kept his cool, remembering his conversation with Rachel. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Brooks. Actually, this property is not connected to the HOA. The previous owner—" "Absurd," Catherine interrupted him, her smile instantly disappearing. "All the properties in Maple Grove belong to our association. Mr. Richardson's supposed disengagement has no legal validity. I have the documents that prove otherwise," Andrew replied, keeping his composure. "The house was built in 1978, 3 years before the HOA was formed." Paul Davis snorted, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. "Mr. Wilson, we strongly suggest you reconsider your position. The HOA has specific protocols for pool maintenance, and violations can result in significant fines. You don't have the authority to fine me. I'm not a member of the association." Catherine stepped forward, invading Andrew's personal space. "Listen to me, Mr. Wilson. We don't tolerate unruly homeowners in our community. You have 48 hours to install the proper coverage and sign the HOA membership papers, or you will face the consequences." After the pair left, Andrew immediately contacted Rachel Martinez, who put him in touch with Michael Bennett, an attorney specializing in real estate law. During a video conference that afternoon, Bennett examined the property documents. "Your position is solid, Mr. Wilson," the attorney confirmed. "The HOA has no jurisdiction over your property. However, based on previous cases I've handled, I suggest you document all interactions with them. Catherine Brooks has an interesting reputation in the area." Over the next few days, Andrew installed security cameras around the property, a decision that proved to be the right one when a week later he found a pile of fine notices in his mailbox. The alleged infractions ranged from inadequate pool maintenance to disturbing the visual harmony of the neighborhood. The situation escalated when Andrew discovered that Paul Davis was photographing his property and distributing flyers to neighbors, claiming that the inadequately supervised pool posed a risk to neighborhood children. The final straw came when Catherine Brooks called an emergency HOA meeting, publicly declaring that Andrew's property was a stain on the community. "This is defamation," Bennett declared when Andrew updated him on the developments. "They are clearly trying to force you to join the HOA through harassment and intimidation. We have grounds for legal action." Andrew hesitated, considering the implications of a lawsuit. He didn't want to create a war with his neighbors, but he couldn't allow his rights to be violated either. The situation came to a head on a Sunday afternoon when Andrew found employees hired by the HOA trying to install a cover on his pool without his permission. "This is trespassing," he declared, firmly, filming the scene with his cell phone while Catherine Brooks supervised the operation of his garden. "Leave immediately, or I will call the police. We have the authority to ensure the safety of the community," Catherine retorted, but her voice shook slightly when she noticed the security cameras recording everything. Andrew already had his phone to his ear, contacting the authorities. "Officer, I'd like to report a break-in in progress." The arrival of the police cars attracted the attention of the entire neighborhood, and Andrew realized that the confrontation with the HOA had just begun. As he watched Catherine Brooks gesticulating furiously at the officers, he knew he would need all his determination and Bennett's legal guidance to defend his rights as a homeowner. The sun was setting over Maple Grove, casting long shadows over the pool that had become the center of a much bigger battle than Andrew had ever imagined when he banged his gavel at the auction. This wasn't just a dispute over a security cover, it was a fight for the fundamental right to property and against the abuse of power that often hid behind artificial smiles and arbitrary regulations. Andrew woke up to the sound of a lawnmower turning on at 6:30 in the morning, right in front of his window. Paul Davis, the HOA administrator, was methodically driving the equipment across Andrew's lawn, a satisfied smile on his face, as he deliberately violated private property. "We're just maintaining neighborhood standards, Mr. Wilson," shouted Paul when Andrew came out to confront him. "Your lawn was half an inch higher than our regulations allow." Andrew took a deep breath, activating the camera on his cell phone. "You're trespassing on my property again, Mr. Davis. This will be added to the file." The mention of a lawsuit made Paul hesitate, turning off the mower. Catherine Brooks emerged from behind a nearby bush, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Lawsuit?" she laughed scornfully. "Mr. Wilson, we're a close-knit community here in Maple Grove. Lawsuits are for people who don't know how to be civilized." Andrew's phone vibrated. It was Michael Bennett, his lawyer. "I have some interesting news," Bennett said when Andrew picked up, turning away from the intruding duo. "I've discovered that Catherine Brooks has a history. 3 previous lawsuits for harassment and abuse of power in other HOAs. She always resigns before the investigations are completed and moves to another association." This information changed everything. Andrew set up an emergency meeting with Bennett at his office in downtown Fairview Heights. The lawyer had a stack of documents on his desk, including records of previous cases involving Catherine. "She always operates the same way," Bennett explained, spreading out photos and documents. "First, she tries to intimidate new homeowners into joining the HOA. Then, when she meets resistance, she begins a campaign of defamation and harassment. The ultimate goal, to force the sale of the property to someone aligned with her interests." "How come she's never been arrested?" asked Andrew, flipping through the documents. "People give up, sell their homes, move away. Catherine counts on that." Bennett paused meaningfully. "But you have something the others didn't: solid documentation and video evidence of multiple home invasions." While they were discussing legal strategies, Andrew received a text message from his neighbor Eleanor Martinez, a 70-year-old woman who lived next door. "They're here again, with an inspector." Andrew and Bennett rushed back to Maple Grove. When they got there, they found Catherine, Paul, and a man with a dubious badge examining Andrew's pool over the wall. "This is Mr. Thompson, a certified swimming pool inspector," Catherine announced triumphantly. "He will confirm that your pool poses a risk to public safety." Bennett immediately intervened. "Unless you have a court order, you 3 are trespassing again." The supposed inspector became visibly uncomfortable when Bennett started photographing his badge. I need to check some documents in the car," he muttered, walking away quickly. Eleanor Martinez appeared on his balcony, holding a cup of tea. "You know, Catherine," she said aloud, "I still have those recordings from the 2019 HOA meeting when you suggested using the reserve fund for personal expenses." Catherine's face paled. Paul Davis looked at his boss with obvious concern. Bennett smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, how about a chat in my office tomorrow, 9 o'clock? We'll discuss not only the current situation, but also some interesting financial irregularities we've discovered." Over the next few days, the atmosphere in Maple Grove changed dramatically. Other residents, encouraged by Andrew's resistance, began to share their own stories of intimidation. Jennifer Kumar of House 468 revealed that she had been forced to repaint her house 3 times in 1 month because Catherine always found an inappropriate shade of beige. An independent audit of the HOA was initiated, revealing a pattern of arbitrary fines and questionable use of association funds. Paul Davis, fearing the legal consequences, began to cooperate, providing emails and internal documents that demonstrated the systematic harassment scheme. "It's not just about my pool anymore," Andrew explained during a meeting with other residents in his living room. It's about restoring dignity to this community. Eleanor Martinez, who has become a key ally, organized a petition calling for Catherine's immediate resignation. Maple Grove was a wonderful place before she came, said Eleanor, passing around the signature sheets. We can make this neighborhood a home again, not a prison of arbitrary rules. The pressure increased when Bennett filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of several affected residents. Catherine Brooks, for the first time, seemed to have encountered an obstacle she couldn't get around with intimidation. One afternoon, while Andrew was working in his home office, he heard a commotion outside. Catherine Brooks was removing her things from the HOA office, escorted by two board members. Paul Davis watched from a distance, nervously straightening his tie. Mr. Wilson, Paul approached him later that day. I'd like to apologize. I followed orders without question for too long. Andrew studied the man for a moment. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to people you thought were unquestionable authorities. The battle for the pool had turned into something bigger, a lesson in courage, community, and the importance of standing up to injustice. As the sun set over Maple Grove, Andrew gazed at his glistening pool, now a symbol not only of his personal victory, but of the liberation of an entire neighborhood from the yoke of tyrannical authority. The discovery of Catherine Brooks' troubled history in other HOAs triggered a wave of investigations that shook Maple Grove to its foundations. Andrew Wilson, now armed with crucial information, turned his home office into a makeshift operations center with walls covered in documents, photos, and a detailed timeline of the HOA's infractions. Look at this, said Eleanor Martinez, adjusting her reading glasses as she examined old financial records she had saved. In 2019, Catherine approved a special maintenance fee of $5,000 per home. The promised playground was never built. Andrew typed furiously on his laptop, cross-referencing data. And here's the bank statement, showing a transfer of the same amount to a company called Brooks Consulting LLC. I bet we can trace that back to her. Michael Bennett, his lawyer, arrived for the strategy meeting with more ammunition. I got statements from 3 former residents who were practically forced to sell their homes. One of them curiously sold it to Catherine's brother for half the market value. The case was expanding far beyond the initial dispute over the swimming pool. Jennifer Kumar, who had suffered from absurd demands about the color of her house, brought her own evidence, dozens of emails in which Catherine threatened her with astronomical fines if she didn't hire a specific company for the painting, which they later discovered belonged to Paul Davis's cousin. This is no longer just about an abusive HOA, Bennett declared, organizing the documents. We're talking about an elaborate scheme of extortion and fraud. The investigation gained an unexpected ally when Marcus Reynolds, an investigative reporter for the Fairview Heights Chronicle, became interested in the story. After a discreet meeting at a local cafe, Andrew shared copies of carefully selected documents. This is a story that needs to be told, said Marcus, leafing through the evidence. How many other communities could be suffering the same kind of abuse? The pressure began to show results. Paul Davis, realizing that the ship was sinking, arranged a secret meeting with Andrew and Bennett in the lawyer's office. Catherine has a system, Paul revealed nervously. She identifies valuable properties, creates problems for the owners through the HOA, and then organizes the purchase for reduced prices through oranges. She's already done this in at least 3 other condos. Why are you telling us this now? Asked Andrew. Because she started threatening my family, replied Paul, his voice shaking. When I suggested that we should back off from her case, she mentioned accidents that could happen in my wife's car. Bennett recorded Paul's full statement, which also provided drives with emails, text messages, and spreadsheets detailing the scheme. The evidence was devastating. Meanwhile, Eleanor organized a secret meeting with other residents in the basement of her house. 17 neighbors attended, each with their own story of abuse and intimidation. My rose garden was accidentally destroyed after I voted against a rates increase, shared one resident. I received fines for excessive Christmas decorations when I refused to hire the installation company she recommended, reported another. Andrew documented each testimony, building an even stronger case. The community, once divided by fear, was coming together. Catherine, feeling the tide turning, attempted one last coup. One morning, Andrew found workers installing a fence around her property. Executive order from the HOA, declared the supervisor. Your property has been declared a hazard zone. Andrew immediately called the police and Bennett, who arrived almost simultaneously. This time Catherine was present, brandishing an official appearance document. This is a municipal warrant, she declared triumphantly. Bennett examined the document and smiled. Interesting, because I just talked to the building department. They didn't issue any warrants today. The document was a forgery. Catherine had finally crossed a line she couldn't undo. As she was taken in for questioning, her facade of authority completely crumbled. You don't understand, she shouted. I built this community. I keep order. Reporter Marcus Reynolds was there, capturing every moment. This cover story the following Sunday, the HOA's reign of terror, how a community came together against tyranny, exploded like a bomb, generating national interest in the case. The revelations kept coming. Investigators discovered that Catherine had built a complex network of front companies that benefited from the HOA's mandatory contracts. The scheme had netted millions over the years. You know, it's ironic, commented Eleanor, sitting with Andrew on their balcony as they watched the investigators search the HOA's office. Catherine always said she was protecting property values. In the end, she was the biggest threat we faced. Andrew nodded, gazing at his swimming pool, the symbol that started this whole revolution. Sometimes it takes an external threat to bring a community together. The battle wasn't over yet. Lawsuits and HOA reorganization were just beginning, but something fundamental had changed in Maple Grove. The residents were no longer strangers hiding behind high fences, but allies united in a common cause. I think we should organize a community party, suggested Jennifer Kumar. In your pool, of course. Andrew smiled, imagining his pool, once a point of contention, transformed into a symbol of community unity and renewal. The real victory was not just in the defeat of Catherine Brooks, but in the birth of a stronger, more united community. The explosive story in the Fairview Heights Chronicle about Catherine Brooks and her reign of terror in the HOA had a domino effect that no one could have predicted. The morning after publication, Andrew's phone kept ringing with calls from residents of other communities who recognized Catherine's modus operandi in their own experiences. Mr. Wilson, a shaky voice on the other end of the line, identified herself as Sandra Mitchell, a former resident of Pine Valley Estates. Catherine Brooks was president of our HOA in 2017. I lost my home after she implemented a series of special fees that I couldn't afford. Bennett organized an emergency meeting at his office where Sandra and 5 other victims from different communities shared eerily similar stories. The pattern was always the same. Catherine would take leadership positions in HOAs, implement draconian rules, force homeowners to sell for low prices, and then disappear when investigations began. I've managed to track down more than a dozen properties that have been acquired by shell companies linked to Catherine over the last 5 years, explained Marcus Reynolds, who continued investigating. All following the same pattern: harassed owners, absurd fines, and forced sales. Paul Davis, now cooperating fully with the investigations, provided access to an external hard drive containing years of correspondence between Catherine and various accomplices. Among the documents, Andrew found something disturbing: a detailed manual entitled Community Acquisition Strategies. It's practically a step-by-step guide to systematized intimidation, Andrew observed, flipping through the pages with growing indignation. She's turned real estate harassment into a science. Eleanor Martinez organized a support group for victims, turning her living room into a makeshift assistance center. Jennifer Kumar, using her skills as an accountant, began to unravel the complex financial network that Catherine had built. The numbers don't lie, Jennifer explained, pointing to detailed spreadsheets. She moved millions through shell companies. Every fine, every forced sale, every overpriced contract, it was all part of a bigger scheme. The investigation attracted the attention of the FBI, especially after discovering connections to money laundering and interstate extortion. Federal agents arrived in Maple Grove, turning the quiet community into the scene of a federal operation. This is bigger than we imagined, commented Special Agent Richard Morrison, examining the documentation gathered by Andrew and his allies. Ms. Brooks may be just the tip of the iceberg of a national real estate fraud operation. Catherine, faced with irrefutable evidence, tried one last desperate move. Through her lawyer, she offered a deal. she would resign all her positions and leave Maple Grove in exchange for the charges being dropped. "No way," was the unanimous response from the residents during an emergency assembly held in Andrews Garden. The swimming pool which had started the whole saga now served as the backdrop for a historic moment of community unity. "It's no longer about one person or one property," Andrew declared in front of the assembled neighbors. "It's about justice for all the communities that have suffered under this kind of tyranny." The case gained even more momentum when Rachel Martinez, the realtor who had sold the house to Andrew, discovered old documents showing that Catherine had used similar tactics in 3 different states, always under slightly altered names. Catherine Brooks, Catherine Brooker, Catherine Brooks. Rachel listed showing photos of documents. Different names, same face, same tactics. Paul Davis, motivated by a mixture of guilt and a desire for redemption, began working with the investigators to reconstruct the entire operation. His cooperation revealed a network of corrupt public officials who facilitated the manipulation of documents and authorizations. She had people in notary offices, building departments, even the city council, Paul confessed. "It was a perfect system, until I met someone who wasn't intimidated." Andrew realized that his decision to confront the HOA over the pool had inadvertently exposed a criminal operation that was victimizing entire communities. What had begun as a dispute over safety regulations had turned into a federal investigation into organized real estate crime. Eleanor, watching the movement of federal agents through the neighborhood, smiled at Andrew. "You know, it's most ironic. Catherine always said she was protecting the value of our properties. In the end, she was the biggest threat we faced." The evidence kept piling up. Jennifer discovered that several of the companies approved by the HOA for maintenance services were actually operated by Catherine's relatives and associates, all charging inflated prices for services often not even performed. "The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity," Jennifer explained during a meeting with investigators. "First, create non-existent problems, then force the owners to hire specific companies to solve them. If they refused, the fines began." The investigation revealed that Catherine had amassed a considerable fortune through her operations with properties in 3 states and offshore bank accounts. The empire she had built through intimidation and fraud was finally crumbling. Sometimes Andrew reflected, watching the sunset reflected in his pool. It only takes one person willing to say no to expose an entire corrupt system. The Maple Grove community emerged stronger and more united from the ordeal. Neighbors, once isolated by fear, now met regularly to discuss the future of the community. The HOA would be completely restructured with new bylaws guaranteeing transparency and limiting powers. Federal Prosecutor Richard Martinez's office was packed that Thursday morning. Andrew Wilson, accompanied by Michael Bennett, watched intently as FBI agents presented a detailed chronology of Catherine Brooks' criminal activities on a projection screen. "We've identified 47 properties acquired irregularly over the last 6 years," explained Special Agent Diana Chun, pointing to a digital map marked with red dots. "The total estimated loss exceeds $12 million. Paul Davis, sitting in a corner of the room with his own lawyer, was completing his plea bargain. His revelations had exposed a network of corrupt public officials in 3 different states, all involved in Catherine's scheme. The most surprising thing," Chen continued, "is that Maple Grove was just one of Brooks' many active projects. We found documentation indicating that she was about to take control of 2 more HOAs next month." Andrew felt a chill at the thought of how many other communities would have been victimized if the dispute over his pool hadn't triggered this whole investigation. Eleanor Martinez, who was also present as a key witness, gently squeezed his shoulder in solidarity. "The evidence is irrefutable," declared Prosecutor Martinez, leafing through a thick folder. "Mail fraud, extortion, money laundering, falsification of federal documents. Catherine Brooks will face decades in prison." Meanwhile, in Maple Grove, a remarkable transformation was underway. Jennifer Kumar was leading a transition committee to completely restructure the HOA. The new bylaws, developed with community participation, established clear limits of authority and transparency mechanisms. "We're creating something revolutionary here," explained Jennifer during an assembly in the newly renovated community center. "An HOA that exists to serve the residents, not control them." The movement started in Maple Grove has begun to inspire other communities. Marcus Reynolds, who continued to cover the story, received daily reports from neighborhood associations across the country that were revising their practices and policies. "You created a model," Marcus told Andrew during an interview. "You've shown that it's possible to have an organized community without authoritarianism." Catherine Burke's arrest took place on a rainy Tuesday. Andrew watched from his office window as federal agents escorted her out of her home in Oakwood Heights, an upscale suburb 30 minutes from Maple Grove. Her empire of intimidation and fraud had finally crumbled. "You don't understand," she shouted at the local news cameras. "I kept these communities running. I kept order." Paul Davis, who would testify against his former boss, found redemption by helping other communities identify and prevent similar abusive practices. "It took me a long time to find my conscience," he admitted during a meeting of the new community council. "But now I can use my experience to prevent others from making the same mistakes." Andrew's swimming pool, the catalyst for all this change, has become a symbol of community unity. On a sunny Saturday in July, he organized Maple Grove's first annual party, with dozens of families celebrating not only the end of Catherine's regime of terror, but the birth of a true community. It's amazing how something as simple as standing up for our rights can trigger such profound change. Eleanor reflected, watching children playing in the water while adults chatted animatedly around the pool. The federal investigation continued to reveal ramifications of Catherine's scheme. It was discovered that she had built a nationwide network of HOA consultants who replicated her tactics in different states. The Maple Grove case became a case study for law enforcement agencies and neighborhood associations across the country. "The real crime wasn't just financial," Bennett explained during a talk about the case at a real estate law conference. "It was the theft of people's sense of community safety and dignity." Andrew, observing his transformed neighborhood, realized that the most significant victory was not in the lawsuits or the arrests, but in the recovery of community spirit. Neighbors who used to barely greet each other now organized shared dinners, citizen watch groups, and joint improvement projects. "Sometimes we need to fight for the right to be neighbors," he said during the inauguration of the new community playground built with funds recovered from Catherine's scheme. Not just homeowners, but members of a real community. The legacy of the Maple Grove case has continued to reverberate far beyond its borders. State legislators began proposing reforms to the laws regulating HOAs, including greater oversight and more robust protections for homeowners. The Maple Grove model of community governance became a national benchmark. One quiet afternoon a year after it all began, Andrew sat by his pool reflecting on the extraordinary journey that a simple dispute had sparked. Eleanor joined him, bringing her famous lemonade. "Do you know what impresses me most?" she commented, taking a seat next to him. "It wasn't just defeating Catherine. It was discovering that we had the strength to change things all this time. We just needed someone to take the first step." Andrew smiled, watching the sun set over a transformed community. The pool that had caused so much conflict now reflected something much deeper: the power of collective resistance against injustice and the ability of people to rebuild not just their homes but their community bonds. In the end, he replied, it wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about people choosing what kind of community they wanted to be. And so Maple Grove continued its journey of renewal, a living testimony that even the smallest battles for justice can trigger changes that echo far beyond their original boundaries.